Hello, Sorocaba and Sesc. Nice to be here. How many people can understand me when I speak in English? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very glad that I was invited to talk about music and music production, and maybe tell some stories from my career in this field. Maybe, if you are so bold, I'm going to ask if anybody has a question or two, and then I can know what you're interested in and make some stories directly to what you want to know. Okay, does anybody have a question that we could start off riffing on? No? Okay, well then I will tell you about my childhood. I started to play the piano when I was 8 years old. And at 13 years old, I joined my first rock and roll band, and I played electric organ in rock band. And I had many, many rock bands, but I wasn't very good. And I kept getting kicked out, even with my best friends' bands. They just thought, and he wants to play, but he's not that good. So I kept getting kicked out of my friends' bands. But I really thought that the future was in music. I thought music was very important because I was listening to things when I was 10 and 11 years old. I was hearing the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and the Doors, and this music seemed to be talking to me and telling me stories and showing me pictures of the world that were different than what was in our newspaper and what our teachers were telling us at school. And it gave me a lot of really strange and intense feelings. So I thought, wow, music can do that. I gotta play music. I really have to take it seriously. And I don't know, when I was about 18, I thought, I want to write songs. I want to sing, I want to play guitar, and I want to write songs. I didn't know how to do it. I knew how to play piano, okay. And I met a guy, and he had a 4-track tape recorder, a TIAC, okay? And maybe later I'm going to show you a little film about this tape recorder. And how many here, I don't know what you know, how many people here know what reel-to-reel tape recorders look like? Okay, not too many, so I'm in the right path. Before the days of laptops and of computers, we used to record on magnetic tape. Now that was pieces of plastic that had some magnetic material and these 2 reels that spun around and would record the sound. For example, I think Sgt. Pepper's was recorded on either a 4-track or an 8-track tape recorder, which means you have 4 channels of sound. And if you can imagine all those sounds on Sgt. Pepper's, orchestra, backing vocals, rock and roll band, sitars, tablas, all those instruments being recorded on 4 tracks is pretty incredible. And the way they did that is they would record the whole rock and roll band on 1 track, and then they would record the singing on another track, and then they would record the orchestra and bounce down the singing and the band with the orchestra onto 1 track. Can you imagine that? And then they'd erase the other 3 tracks and start putting more stuff. So it was like a process of recording and destruction, and eventually you could get something that sounded like an orchestra with a band and massive instrumentation on a little piece of tape this big with 4 channels, okay? So I thought if I could learn how to record, if I could get in a room with a tape recorder and a microphone and a piano and a guitar, that if nobody watched me, I would learn how to do it myself. If somebody stood there and watched me play the guitar and press the button and said, okay, you just made a mistake. Okay, do it again. I would probably get so nervous that I wouldn't be able to do it. But if nobody was around, I thought I could write songs and learn all these things, and it worked. It took me a while because in the beginning when I recorded too hot. The needles were always in the red, so it was really distorted. And now, of course, I'm famous for the distorted sound, but in those days it was an accident, and it wasn't very nice sounding. So after about a year, I learned how to record. I just did it by trial and error, and I recorded my first song. And I used a synthesizer called Arp Odyssey. Has anyone heard of that synthesizer before? ARP Odyssey. This is a synthesizer that was brand new when I was a teenager. It was in my school, in the music room. It came in, and Stevie Wonder was using it when it came out, and like a lot of Chick Corea in jazz world was using it. It was very cool. 2 oscillator synthesizer, 30 knobs, 30 switches, and no memory. So it meant that once you found a sound, you could never get it back again. Even if you wrote it down, it would never come back. So this was the instrument that I learned on. At first, it was very hard for me to make sounds. I didn't understand it scientifically, but I just wanted to learn it. And all my favorite music now is going to synthesizers. I saw a movie called A Clockwork Orange. Has anybody seen that movie? Okay, a few people have. It was a very special movie because it was one of the first movies that had all analog synthesizers in the soundtrack. And what were they doing, these synthesizers? The composer, the player who played the synths was doing Beethoven's symphonies, the Ninth Symphony, which has a choir and orchestra, and she was doing all the parts on a Moog synthesizer. And the choir was singing in German, and she made the synthesizer sing in German, and nobody had ever heard a synthesizer sing in German before, and it was a real revelation, and it made me think, synthesizers are the future. This is the new scientific sound, and really cool, so I wanted to learn how to do this. The Korg company, how many people have heard of Korg synthesizers? Yes, some people here? It's a modern company, it's been around since the 80s, but they're still very vital all over the world. They just reissued the Arp Odyssey synthesizer a year ago. A year ago, they just came out with a version of it with exactly the same sounds and same knobs. And if you ever get a chance to see one or play one, I recommend it. One thing it does that's very interesting is it can make really musical sounds like basses and melodies, but it can also make crazy sounds like birds that turn into the ocean, that turn into UFOs, okay? If you can imagine what that sounds like, you can just move some knobs and it sounds like birds are singing, and then another knob makes it turn into ocean waves and then fly off in a flying saucer. So it's really interesting the kind of crazy sounds you can do with this, as well as incredible bass sounds. So I was exploring all this with my tape recorder and putting lots of synths on it and distorted guitars and singing. And I learned how to write songs one day. I finished my first song, and from that time on, I wanted to be a songwriter. And I just spent all my time writing and writing and writing. But every time I wrote with a recorder. So I learned to be a producer. At the same time, I was learning to write and sing and play guitar. It's very important for my process. Now, you guys have laptops and you have sound cards and you can do 30 or 60 tracks of audio very easily, but in those days it was very rare that somebody had a 4-track tape recorder. Like, I had 2 friends that had them, and I had to either go to their house and use them when they weren't using it or borrow it at my house for a little while. And very precious stuff. I had some good luck a couple times in my music career. I had started my own bands in Seattle. I lived in Seattle growing up, and I started 2 bands of my own, one called Mental Mannequin and the other called Colored Twigs. And we played my own songs. The Colored Twigs was 2 people. We used a tape recorder that had drum machines and synthesizer sounds, and I played keyboards, and my partner played guitar, and we both sang. And Mental Mannequin had 7 musicians, and everybody was really crazy, and it was like a rock band with 3 singers and guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards. And in the 1990s, everyone knows that Seattle was a very good place to play music. It started with a band called Tad and a band called Mudhoney. And for some reason, the British in England, they fell in love with Tad and Mudhoney. Now, why did they fall in love with Tad and Mudhoney? Does anybody have any ideas why that might have happened? Okay, I'm going to tell you my theory, okay? Tad and Mud, in Seattle it rains all the time, and there's a lot of trees around. So the kids like me, we would just stay in our house all day and play guitars, and most bands like Tad and Mudhoney would go in their parents' basements and drink lots of beer and just make this music in the little basement, okay? So, and it's very cold and rainy in Seattle, so they would wear these flannel shirts that looked like the kind that people would cut in the forest, you know, like loggers. Everybody know what a logger is? You're chopping down trees, and you're like a primitive worker with this shirt and this long hair and greasy hair. And so when they came to England and played rock and roll in these logger outfits, the British just thought it was hilarious. They look at these guys, you know, they're not wearing suits, they're not wearing cool haircut. They just look like a bunch of people from the hills, uneducated, and they're playing this very simple music, and they just thought it was hilariously funny, and they loved it. So this was the opening of the door for Seattle. Before that, it was a very hard place to play music, mostly known for Boeing airplanes. That was what people did in Seattle. They either worked at Boeing or they went fishing in the ocean near us to catch fish. And so if you were a musician and maybe you wore fur coats and makeup and had spiky hair, people just thought, where are you from? What are you doing? You're just crazy. And they would yell things at the musicians and throw bottles when they passed by in the car. It was not an easy place to play music. But after England recognized Tad and Mudhoney, suddenly we were on the map for the first time. Even Jimi Hendrix, he was born in Seattle. And he certainly could not play music there. He had to go around the United States, and finally he ended up in New York, and he got taken to England again and got discovered and famous in England, not Seattle. It was impossible in those days. So once Mudhoney and Tad became famous in England, then suddenly all these bands started getting attention, like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Nirvana. And then when Nirvana hit with Nevermind and became like the #1 record in the USA at the time, then every musician from around the country was moving to Seattle to live. Suddenly it became like Jerusalem, you know, rock and roll central. And this was a great time because I remember when I was starting, nobody cared about music except for a few musicians, and it was very small. And suddenly there were 10 new clubs opening up, and people were listening to concerts every night, and George Clinton and Bootsy Collins and Funkadelic all came many, many times, and it was just a great party town in the year 1990, the 1991. It was incredible. And the best part was that the record companies in America are based in Los Angeles and New York, okay? So it meant if you were growing up in Chicago or you were growing up in Seattle, you'd have to basically move to another city and try to make a living there until your band got signed. But suddenly, in the 1990s, all the record labels of America moved to Seattle and made headquarters there. And they would literally go outside and look for people with long hair carrying guitars and go, "Are you in a band? Would you like a record deal? Let's go have dinner and talk about a record deal." Everybody with a guitar and long hair got a record deal in 1991, 92, and 93, and I was there. And so my band was called Sky Cries Mary at the time, and we got a record deal, and for the first time in my life, I toured around America playing concerts, and I had enough money in my pockets to buy 2 Arp Odyssey synthesizers and a Hammond organ and electric pianos and guitars, and it was a great time. I was known as a keyboard player. Like, that's how I was producing my own songs, but nobody really knew my songs very well. I was producing all the time, recording, writing my own songs, but I was mostly known as a musician in bands. I wasn't working as a producer for other people, that's for sure. I was learning skills. I was learning how to use 8-track digital recorders by Tascam, and I was using mixers and microphones and digital delays and digital reverbs. I hadn't learned how to use compressors yet. I never saw a condenser mic yet, but I was just using a Shure SM57 for my singing and recording guitars. And even most of the time when I recorded my guitars, I didn't use an amplifier. I just used a distortion and an echo and plugged it straight into the tape deck. And I'll show you something about that later. All right. In about 1996 or 97, the Seattle scene finished. It was over. Kurt Cobain left to go somewhere else. Soundgarden broke up. Alice in Chains had bad drug problems, and it just quickly as it came, it was 5 years of very good times, it was over. And so I was in a new band called Absinthe, and we decided to move to New York because New York, I don't know, just holds a lot of mystery in the United States for creativity. We were thinking of Andy Warhol and Blondie and the Ramones and Talking Heads and television, and we thought, we got to go to New York. Well, when I got to New York, it was really fun. I found a studio to work in so I could continue writing my music, but it's so much more expensive in New York than Seattle. In Seattle, I was paying $150 a month for for the bottom of a house where my studio was, my bedroom, the kitchen. It was a beautiful house. I had the whole floor for $150. When I moved to New York, I was sleeping on a lady's couch in front of a bus stop in the East Village, and it was $900 just to sleep on her couch per month, and I was paying another $700 a month to rent part of the studio. So my outgoing money went from $150 to $1,600 just by flying across the country and landing. And within about 7 months, all the money I had saved from my band and from other things, publishing, disappeared, and I had nothing left. And my parents and all my friends were telling me how to fill out job applications. And I thought, well, you know, I've been playing music my whole life. Was assigned on Warner Brothers. I toured. I have synthesizers. I wrote 1,000 songs. But I guess it's over. You know, it's time to get a job, and it was great. And just at that horrible moment where I was facing working in a supermarket or something like that, someone said, a friend of ours told me that you can record stuff. Is it true? And I said, yeah, I could record things. And they said, let me hear what you do. And so I played them a few songs that I recorded. At the studio that I was a partner in now in New York, it was very small, but the guy who made the studio filled it with really good equipment, incredible microphones, and he was a bit of a genius, and he decided to read all the magazine articles about different producers and what their favorite preamps and compressors and microphones were, and he bought a little of everything. Like, this is the one that Led Zeppelin likes. This is the one the Rolling Stones like. This is the one Pink Floyd likes. So suddenly, I went from a basement studio in Seattle to a real studio that had good equipment, and I learned how to use this equipment. And when the first band came to me, I recorded them in one day. And while I was there, the drummer said, oh, I like your drum sounds. I have a different band. Can we bring them here tomorrow? And so after day one, then day two came, another band, and pretty soon I had a job. And my job was a producer for other bands. Now, this was not something I wanted to do. It was not my plan, but suddenly I was making money and I was paying my rent, and I kind of liked working with the bands, and they seemed to enjoy my sounds. So this was the beginning of my professional producer career. It was different than my musician career because it wasn't my songs I was working on, but it was still very interesting and very good. A year later, now we're talking the year 2000. I moved to New York in late 98. In 99, I kind of worked on my own and also discovered being a producer. In the year 2000, I went to a small nightclub to see if I wanted my band to play there, and there were two bands playing that night. I saw a band called Come On that I really liked. They sounded like the modern Beatles with harmonies, and they looked really great. And another band called The Strokes, okay? And I didn't really like the Strokes that much. They were very young and very stylish, but they seemed very proud of themselves, and I didn't know if their music really deserved all that pride, okay? But because I wanted to keep my job going, I went to both bands with my business card. I'm Gordon Raphael. I have a studio down the street. Come to me, I'll make a demo, very cheap, and you'll like it. Well, the band I liked, Come On, they didn't come. And the other band, The Strokes, they came. And they told me they want to make a demo. Why did they want to make a demo? Because they were playing the worst bars where you play for free and 50 people go, and they'd been doing it for 2 years, and they really wanted to try to make a demo and get some attention to play bigger bars. That was the idea of our first meeting. So I said, I made a deal. They record for 3 days, we finish 3 songs, and they give me like $200 per song. So I was gonna make like $600 at the end of the weekend, and they walk away with 3 songs as a demo. Well, somehow they met somebody who worked across the street at a nightclub, and he sent the tape to England. Again, England, third reference to England. And the people in England at Rough Trade Records heard this demo we made, and they jumped up and down and said, "Whoa, this is incredible. We have to sign this band right away." And suddenly, this demo I made, they released it. We didn't record it again. We didn't put more money into it. We didn't remix it. Nothing. It just went out as these 3 songs. It's called the Modern Age EP. Has anyone seen it? Okay. It has 3 of the exact same songs that are on the album, but it was done in a demo style. It was done in 3 days. And when the Strokes first came to me in my studio, I asked them the same question I ask every band when I meet them. If they want to work with me, I say, well, what do you want to do? You know, do you want to sound like an orchestra? Do you want to sound electronic, pop, 60s, future? What do you want to do? And they told me 2 things. They said, whatever everybody else is doing right now is what we don't want to do. Okay, that was my first clue. This is the year 2000. And the second clue they gave me, wait for it, you know, we want to sound like if you took a spaceship into the future and you found a band from the past that you really liked, that's what we want to sound like. Okay. So the first one was a little easier for me to deal with. In the year 2000, all the big studios in New York were having a crisis because they were using 24-track tape recorders, and Pro Tools was kind of brand new. And so if you were Michael Jackson and you had Sony's money and millions of dollars, you could link 2 24-track machines and have 48 tracks of power if you were Michael Jackson or Lionel Richie or something like that. But with Pro Tools, suddenly everybody that could afford a computer and Pro Tools software could have 60 tracks of audio. So it's like, ha, we have twice as many as Michael Jackson. And what were the producers doing? They were filling up every single track on every song. So you'd record a band with a drum set, kick drum, snare drum, overheads, cymbals, toms. And then they would put a sample of a kick drum underneath the real kick drum. And they'd put an 808 sound underneath the kick. So it was like 60 tracks of audio, and everybody was doing it. Your Prodigy, your 9 Inch Nails, all this stuff that was happening. So when I thought, well, what aren't people doing? I said, okay, I got 8 microphones. I have a little room out there. Go out and play your song, and I'll press record, and we'll record like that. I said, okay. And they went out. I literally had 8 microphones. That's all I had at my studio, 8 tracks. And we recorded the music that way. We added the singing, 1 track of singing, mixed it, and that's what you hear on the Modern Age EP. And this, they were very happy because it didn't sound like everybody else. It was a new sound for them, you know. They also, when they were playing for me the first time, I was very interested because they reminded me of the Velvet Underground and the Stooges. And I grew up with that music, but why would these young kids, they were 20 years old in the year 2000, and why would they know the Stooges, and why would they know the Velvet Underground that was so far in the past? I couldn't understand why this band was kind of reminding me of that. And then 2 other factors. The Velvet Underground and the Stooges were not popular bands when they were around. They both got dropped from their labels because nobody was really interested in that sound in the 60s and the 70s. It was really interesting also the first time I recorded the Strokes that weekend for the Modern Age EP. I didn't really remember them from the show. I didn't remember their names. I don't remember which one was doing which job. But when they came running into my studio for the first time, most of the guys looked really energetic, and they were moving amplifiers and drum sets and tuning things up. But this one guy came in, and he looked really sad and really quiet. He looked like this. He was carrying a big case of beer. He was like, while everyone else was busy working, I was setting up microphones, they were setting drum sets, and everybody was energetic. He just sat down, didn't do anything, just opened the beer, started drinking. That was Julian. And I didn't remember if he was just a friend. I thought maybe he's a friend of the band. Why did they bring him? He's kind of a bit of a downer, we would say in English. And after a while, I realized when they were playing that he actually was the leader. And he wrote all the songs, and he wrote the guitar parts, and he wrote the bass parts, and he wrote the drum parts and the hi-hat parts. And the reason I knew that is because every time people were playing, he'd say like, no, you're going a little fast on the hi-hat. No, it's a G sharp on the, he was suddenly like knows everything about every note. And I thought, whoa, this guy is really on it, you know, even though he looks like he's really miserable, he really knows what's going on. And another story about him, when the music was done and it was time for him to sing, I never recorded him before. I didn't know what he sounded like. I didn't know anything about his voice. But usually, when I'm working with a band, the singer is just kind of waiting and waiting for the band to finish so he can do his thing. He's like, the singers are like, when's it my turn? When's it my turn? And then when it's their turn, they go, okay, it's my turn. They run out to the mic and they're like, testing, 1, 2, 3, oh, like this thing. And he's like, I go, Julian, okay, it's time to sing. He goes, now? Yeah, it's time for vocals. Do I have to do it now? Yeah, go out there. Okay. Test. Is that enough? Okay, so then he sang, and I realized, wow, he's got an amazing voice. And he always sang 10 times each song, and he never made a mistake. He never made a wrong note one time when I recorded him, but he sang a different way each time. Like he would just try, I'll try it this way. No, I'll try it this way. And then he would come in and listen to all 10 ways and listen to each word of the 10 way and cut a little bit here and take that one. The yellow, play me the yellow one. Now play the orange. Now the blue. Okay, we'll take the first word from the blue, second from the orange. Now play me the red one. So he could sing 10 times in about 35 minutes. And then it would take 3 hours to pick which word from each take was going to be the real one. So it's very interesting and hard work. Working with them was very hard because actually they were really smart, all of them, and each one would listen to all the details and they would all talk, 5 people at one time. Turn the hi-hat up. Can you change the tone of the guitar? Hey, can you make my voice louder and make it quieter here? So, okay, like this. Like one, I was really busy working with them. So when they came into my studio the first time, in addition to telling me that they wanted to sound like the band from the future, and in addition to telling me they didn't want to sound like anything that was going on, they told me very quickly that they had recorded before in other studios and they hate recording. They said, we just don't like recording. Why don't they like recording? Because the studios they went in New York looked like doctors' offices. They were very sterile. They had no vibe because in those days the studios were making a lot of money making commercials for television. So they wanted to impress ad executives. So it looked like very wealthy places and no energy, no creative vibe, okay? So they said, we don't like recording studios, but my studio was very cool. My studio was like an artist studio. It was underground, like below the sidewalk in the East Village, and had purple velvet drapes and really dark and blue glitter walls. It was very cool. So they liked that studio. And they also told me that they don't like recording because all the people that record and all the engineers and all the producers always treated the musicians badly. Like the engineers, and we've been doing this for years and years. We're the experts, and you young musicians, you're idiots. So we know how it should be, and we're going to show you. This was the attitude that they got when they went to most studios. I didn't really hear. I saw them, and I didn't really hear what was going on. It was just in a small bar. It just seemed like some kids making some sound and acting weird. But when I got them in my studio and I mic'd up the instruments and heard the distinction between the parts of the guitar, the parts of the bass, I realized, wow, this is very interesting music. It's very unusually composed. Usually in a rock band, people are playing chords and maybe the bass line is doing a melody or maybe following the guitar. But for them, one guitar is playing a melody, the bass is playing a melody, and the other guitar is playing a melody, and the singer is singing a melody. So you have, it's more like Bach. It's more like Baroque music with counterpoint than the Nirvana with big rhythm guitars. So it's very interesting musically. Yeah. I did not spend any time. I put a microphone on the one mic on the guitar amp, one mic on the guitar amp, 3 mics on the drums, a mic in the room, a mic on the bass, okay? And then they had their own amplifiers, Fender DeVille, and they had their own little fuzz boxes and their own guitars, and they just played the music, and I recorded it, and that was it, okay? Now, what another producer might have done is doubled the guitar or added some EQ to make it sound more powerful, but I just said, this sounds great, and they liked it. This is what we sound like, okay? Adding the room microphone was very important because it made it sound live. It wasn't just clinical. A lot of producers don't want to use a room microphone as a main element because if you edit, there's bleed and you can't control it. It's a chaos microphone. But I wanted to have that chaos in the sound because I thought it was important. There is one element of the Strokes music that did take some thought, and that is the vocals. It took about 20 minutes of thought, and I'll tell you how it went. After the band had finished recording and he went out to sing, I had been very influenced by a movement in music called industrial music. Has anybody heard of that? It started in Chicago, and I was in love with a band from Vancouver, Canada called Skinny Puppy. And Skinny Puppy, every time they sang, it sounded like distortion turned up to 11. I call it nuclear devastation, like an atom bomb blowing up the voice, okay? And that was like one of my favorite sounds. So when Julian went out to sing, I thought, so check this out. And I put my Avalon preamp on 10. And he came back and he heard this. He heard the sound like that for his voice. And I said, how do you like that, Julian? And he said, that sounds like shit. I hate it. I said, okay. And he said, but you know how you have it like nuclear blown up? What happens instead, you know how your favorite jeans, they don't have holes in them, but they're not brand new. So I thought for a minute, he wants to sound like your favorite pair of jeans, okay? So instead of putting it on 11, maybe 4.5. I put it on 4.5. And I said, go out and sing. And he sang, and there was a little bit of distortion. It wasn't a lot, but there was a significant amount, like your jeans had been through the wash maybe 15 times. They didn't have holes in them, but they were comfortable. And he came in, and he heard that sound, and he went, oh, man, that's the coolest sound I ever heard on vocals. Thank you. Let's do this. And so this was the sound that they used on The Modern Age, on Is This It, and Room on Fire. All the work I produced with them was always through the same machine with the same sound on it, and more or less. That was what we did put a little bit of thought into. Mm-hmm. And I will also tell you that mixing every song, whether it was the EP, the Is This It, Room on Fire, mixing was a scientific process that took days and days and weeks to do, because every hi-hat had to be the certain tone, and then if it was louder here, it had to go down, and the bass had to be a certain tone, and every note had to be heard. If one string was quieter, I had to find a way with compression and EQ to make it louder. So a lot of thought was put in the mixing, and all 5 boys in the band were telling me ideas, and I had my own ideas. So mixing was extremely difficult and precise. And at the time, in 1998, when I first started producing, 1999, when I first started producing the other bands, I wasn't down about it. I was like, I just got $50. I can go to Thai food. I can take a taxi to the party tonight. It was like, wow, it was party. And I was still working on my own music. I still had my own band, and I was balancing it perfectly. Working as a producer in the day, rehearsing with my band at night. It was really great, okay? But then after Is This It, I went over to England to see the Strokes play, and suddenly everybody comes up with a seat. Hey, my band, listen to my band, come to our party, record us. So I was like, okay, I work with you, and I work with you, and I work with you. And suddenly it was a whole other thing. Like after Is This It, people wanted me to produce the record. And also, strangely, the Strokes put my photograph on their first album. Like, how many bands put picture of the producer? And my picture is just as big as theirs. It's like, here's the singer, here's the drummer, here's the producer. So people knew me, like, hey, Gordon, man, good job on the Strokes. Here's my band. Do you want to come work? Yeah. And then that turned into, okay, I live in Berlin now. And then I would go to Seattle and record a band, then go to Mexico and record a band, then go to New York, and then go maybe to England, and then Belgium, and then come back home 4 months later. And all my guitars are there, and all my keyboards are there, but I'm so tired. I just was recording in the studios, making lots of money and recording days and days and days. When I go to the studio, I put on the Doors record on vinyl. I sit on the couch, I maybe dust the synthesizers, make everything perfect, wire the whole studio again. I can't quite play the guitar, I'm not ready yet, and then, I gotta go. So for about, I'd say 8 years when I was living in Berlin, I didn't play music at all. I just sat in my studio and polished my guitars and wired the keyboards differently, and then would go on another tour of producing. And at that point, I started to get down. I thought, there used to be a magic world where I would sit and write melodies and record them and sing and play my guitar and make crazy songs. And I don't remember how I did that. I don't remember where it is. I know it exists because I have all my recordings, but I don't know how I did it. Okay? And that was a little sad. I was actually getting a little stressed out thinking about my music. I don't know where it is anymore. Well, fast forward to this year. I just released my own solo album called Sleep on the Radio. I did my first ever tour of Europe in May. I never played in Europe before. I played in, say, 10 cities. Very fun. And then I came to Argentina, and I started my new band there, and I did 7 shows. And so now I'm on a second tour. We started in Argentina. We just played in Santiago, Chile. And we're going to play here at your festival on Saturday. And then we're going to Florianopolis, Floripa, play there. And then back for 5 more shows in Argentina. So this year has been the year that I figured out how to play the guitar again and sing and have a band and play concerts. So it took a long time to fight my way back into the music. So now I'm very happy. Right? And I'm also producing bands. I produced in Argentina last month, 3-4 bands, and it's all going good, balanced. A lot of my most interesting recording skills I learned during the early years of just working with a 4-track and an echo machine and a phase shifter and a guitar and distortion and phase shifter and a microphone and weird lyrics, okay? When I got to the studio in New York, they had compressors. I learned how to use that for the first time, and good microphones and good preamps. So when I found good microphones and good preamps, I realized I didn't have to use chorus effect, reverb effect, and delay on every channel, which is what I used to do. Every single sound had a short delay and a long delay and a reverb and a pan. You know, I used so many effects because when using a cheap microphone and a cheap recording and no preamp other than something, you know, cheap, you use a lot of effects to try to make it sound cool. Well, I noticed that with a Neumann microphone and a tube preamp and a tube compressor, that if I just yell into the mic, it just sounds like, whoa, it sounds amazing, okay? So I really learned about compression and good microphones and room mics at this time early in New York when I was making the transition. And then right after the Strokes, I moved to London. I moved there, and every studio I was working in had a tape recorder. And so for 1 year after I recorded the Strokes, in the year 2002, I recorded all the bands back on tape, but now I was using 24-track tape, not just little tapes at my house. And I wasn't looking at a computer, and it was really fun. And I recorded Regina Spektor's album on tape during that time too. So, I don't know, with every band I record, every single band, even tomorrow, even yesterday, and even last week, I learned something new. I learned, oh, this guy has this pedal, and oh, this guy wants me to put the backing vocals really quiet or really loud. You know, there's something you learn every time I record. When the internet came, and I don't know, I thought, thank you. I thought, wow, I'm going to make a website, and I'm going to put all of my songs on it so people could hear it. Because other than that, up till the internet came, I just had 1,000 songs on my shelf in CDs and cassettes that only I knew. So one day I said, I sent it all to a mastering lab. I think I put 150 songs on the internet. I made a website and put 150 songs up, and I showed people on Facebook. And it was really great for me to know that people could hear it, but I noticed nobody listened to it. Like, if I put a picture of my dog on my Facebook, everybody, 100 people go, cute, like. If I say, here's my new song, I just made it last night, check it out. It's like, my sister really likes it. My sister always says, great, and she puts a like and no other likes. So with the internet, there's a lot to learn because you can really put your music around the world. And we hear stories of somebody, like I know this girl in Europe, and maybe you've heard of her, maybe you haven't. Her name's Soko. She's a French actress, and when she was like 19 or 20, a friend of hers filmed her playing a ukulele and singing a song called I'll Kill Her, okay? And this song went viral. Like, people saw this cute French girl playing a ukulele and singing this violent song, and she became like a #1 on the radio in Australia because they just downloaded the audio off YouTube. And when she came back from her Australian tour, she got almost a €1 million advance from Universal Publishing. So we hear stories, and I know people where it really happens. You just put up something, and suddenly you are cruising. You got a record deal. You have €1 million in the bank. You know, it happens. But I think we all have to figure out how to use the internet and to our advantage. It's also, in the old days, we had to go to a studio and pay $50 an hour to record something. Now we have sound cards and laptops and microphones. We can also record with the same technology that takes us to the internet. We can record our own music at home. So there's advantages and there's challenges, just like always, okay? For my album that just came out, I had a very interesting experience I want to share with you. And that was, I got a small label to put out my record, and they gave me a budget for promotion. So suddenly it wasn't just me putting it on Facebook, it was some guy in England with connections to indie blogs in the UK, and another person in America who was connected with online magazines there, and in Germany online. And suddenly I started seeing my videos and my articles and interviews appearing online, and people were talking about me, not just me. And I think I made 9 singles before I released my album, and all 9 videos got put on indie blogs and talked about in a picture, in a video, in an article. And I learned that that doesn't really mean anything either. It looked great. I was like, whoa, I'm on this, look at this, it's me. But then the next day, that was replaced by somebody else, and the people that saw that article, I looked at my YouTube, and only 19 people had clicked on the video, which is more than my sister. But for, I don't know, $1,000 or £1,000 from 3 months of work and all that exposure, it didn't really amount to much. And also, I did the same thing with Facebook. I hired a social media specialist, and she raised my numbers on my artist page from 2,000 to 20,000 in 4 months. I had to pay $10 a day to Facebook, and suddenly my numbers grew from 2,000 people following me to 20,000 people. And I thought, whoa, this is great. They're going to buy my record, or they're going to listen to it on Spotify. It didn't work. No, like, it didn't mean anything. And the day I stopped paying, after my record came out, I stopped paying $10 to Facebook every day, and nobody commented on my page. No one even, if I put a picture up, it would be 0 people liked it. So even though there were 20,000 numbers, it didn't mean anything. It's not a vital community. This was a big shock, both of these things. So it's a mystery to me how it's done or what you can do, but I can tell you these are my experiences so far. Thanks for coming to my talk, and yeah, if you want to check out my record, my friend Maria Florencia has some copies over there, and we're going to play, my band is going to play, and her band is going to play too on Saturday, so please come and bring hundreds of your friends. Cheers.